Well, hello everybody out there in Atlanta. This is Chris from HHN with another exciting episode of the HHN Fear the Beard Chatcast. Please forgive me. I am a little bit under the weather again. I just got over a cold, literally the week of Halloween. I was very sick, and a bunch of people around me now are sick, so I've recaught whatever it is that's been going around. There has been a bad bug going around lately, and I have recaught that bug, whatever it is. So please forgive me. We're going to power through this. I wanted to do this before it got a little bit too late, and Halloween Horror Nights 26 is in the far rear view of the mirror. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start right away with talking a little bit about Halloween Horror Nights. I'm going to take this off. It's too much of a glare on the glasses, even though now I can't see. So we'll see how this goes. I did my full review of Halloween Horror Nights 26. This year has been very interesting. I've gotten a lot of flack this year for some of my views. Soul Viewer, yes. Whether or not you watch these things live or you watch them later, I do post them on my YouTube channel. It doesn't really affect me, but I like to do this. I also like to keep these as short as possible. I know there are some other people out there that go on and talk for 4 hours or 5 hours, whatever. That's not going to be the case here. I like to keep these under an hour, as tightly controlled as I possibly can. I got my notes in front of me, so I like to keep everything kind of organized. But anyway, I did do my full review on Halloween Horror Nights 26. You can find that on the website at hhnlegacy.com. Everything is there. But I did want to go ahead and briefly touch upon Halloween Horror Nights 26 here. So I was not the biggest of fans of this year. This year did have its ups, but it also had a lot of downs for me. Most notably the downs being in two very wide aspects, which are Chance and the scare zones. I was not a fan of Chance. I was not a fan of how they presented Chance. I was not a fan of how they just overall did her. Chance, to me, is a good example of what happens when you take a side character that was popular for literally a hot minute, even though Chance has been around since 2007. Most people have not or did not notice her until last year's Carnival of Carnage show. She has been around since 2007, though. This is a character that is literally it's literally Robin to Batman. That's basically how I feel about Chance. Chance works well when she is with Jack. They play off each other nicely. In the show last year, I thought really encompassed that well. This year, it was just, for me, kind of a disaster. Her house was just not very good. Her scare zone was not very good either. But what I really did not like about what they did with her this year was in the writing and how they did not flesh out her character enough to give her any kind of depth. She was just kind of plucked from the show last year because she was popular and put into the event and made the face of the event, where I don't think that they really punctuated her as the icon, which for me was very disappointing, especially when it comes to her house and her scare zone. Her scare zone, yes, was nothing more than a glorified photo op, but you could have put, they had, was it 5 stages around the scare zone, with her being on the main stage, and the other stages were adorned with dummies. And I'm not even sure a whole lot of people that were walking through that scare zone, because they were so, oh, look, there's Chance and she's talking to people. Let's go over there. It's funny because I don't think a whole lot of people walking through that scare zone even knew that there were actors in there. They were just kind of, moth to a flame going towards Chance and not really paying attention to what was going on around them. You could have easily put Chance on a stage somewhere else, and whether it's at the front of the park, or anywhere else in the park, and it could have been the same thing. You could have had a glorified photo op there as well, and used Production Central for a much more elaborate scare zone, which is what they did not do. But more importantly, I was really disappointed with, like I said before, in how they presented her, how they gave her nothing. They basically gave her nothing. They just plucked her from the show last year because she was popular and put her in a scare zone and gave her a house and made her the face of the event with no depth. I mentioned in the review all the icons, with the exception of Fear and even Lady Luck to an extent, have rich backstories or histories or even names. We don't even know Chance's real name. She's just Chance. And that kind of irked me a little bit because it just showed to me that there was a complete lack of admiration for the character. They just did it because she was popular, and that's pretty much it. I also could not deal with her voice. Her voice all over the park, that, interruption stuff that they did, and her voice is just annoying. It gets degrading after a while. That Bart Simpson-like laugh that was playing throughout the park, I just did not like it. I was not a fan. I know she has her supporters. I know she has people that like her. More power to those people. I was not personally a fan of hers. It also begs the question too, moving forward into yes, that was one of the biggest things with Chance for me. One of the things that I did not like was her voice. Her voice, in the show last year, everyone sort of quoted that one line that she had, with Amanda, that Amanda, whatever. That was fine and funny for the moment, but when you stretch that out into, into everything, basically, it just gets degrading. It gets annoying. It almost, in a way, I'm going to drop a Star Wars reference here. It almost in a way reminded me of Jar Jar Binks from the prequels. It was like, okay, enough. It's too much. It just got, it got too degrading, and I couldn't. I just did not like it. But what I was saying before about the part in the show last year, everyone quotes that line, the Amanda line, because it was funny, but it's cool in that one little bubble. And that's it. Don't try to expand that bubble, because when you expand it, it's going to burst and it's going to be bad. But my main gripe with her comes in the presentation of her, in the lack of any kind of depth they gave her as an icon, and it shows that they only did it as a way to just because she was popular. They just didn't give her anything to work with. And her scare zone and her house, like I said, they just weren't up to par for me. But yeah, I know it's kind of controversial because she does have her supporters out there. People love her. But I am not. But it does kind of scare me going forward. I was trying to touch on this before about other side characters. Because, for all intents and purposes, she was popular. People liked her as the icon. So this notion that they could, pull out a side character from a long time ago and put them front and center kind of scares me. I know there's been a lot of people out there that want H&R Blood and Guts to come and be the icon. I am not one of those people. I don't think that the character just doesn't have enough there to really, be the face of the event and to do, to make a good event. It's just not there, especially when it comes to Blood and Guts. I'm having a phone call right now. That is my father. My father is calling me. He's interrupting my Chatcast here. But anyway, and there's a giant boom outside. I don't know what the hell's going on out there. But yeah, the idea of taking these side characters or whatever, it could be, it's on the surface, it's kind of a novelty. You take a character like H&R Blood and Guts, or even Cindy or Eddie, who I know were supposed to have their own events. Both of them got screwed out. Cindy got screwed out twice. But if I was to, if I was a betting man and I'm in the writer's room for next year or even years in the future, somebody is going to point out the fact that Chance was popular, and you have these other side characters, whether it's Cindy or Eddie or somebody like the Terror Queen, who was supposed to be the icon of 2005, but they couldn't exactly sell her for the event, so they came up with the idea of the storyteller. They didn't know how to sell the Terror Queen for that event, so they came up with the idea of the storyteller. It kind of makes me a little nervous going forward here, because I don't think that a character like H&R Blood and Guts should be the icon of the event. It just doesn't doesn't sit well with me, and I fear that they do what they did with Chance this year, where they don't exactly flesh out the character. They just pluck him or her out from obscurity and make them the face of the event with nothing there. But on the plus side, if they do, pull somebody like H&R Blood and Guts out of obscurity or Eddie or Chance, then their voices aren't that degrading. So and there's that. So you have that going forward. As far as the houses go, I'll touch upon this real quickly. We'll get away from the Chance conversation. The vast majority of the houses I actually thoroughly enjoyed. I thought a lot of the houses were done well. There were two that I did not think were done well. Chance's house, Lunatics Playground 3D, and what was it? What's the full title? Lunatics Playground 3D. You Won't Stand a Chance. And also Krampus. I thought both of those houses had potential. I'm not one for 3D houses. I don't really like the 3D house method. I don't think the 3D is very effective at all in any of the houses. There's only been one house, in my view, that has done the 3D well, and that's the In-Between from 2011. I thought Penn and Teller did it well as also the following year. But the In-Between, I think, was the only house that's actually done the 3D effectively and used the 3D to its advantage, rather than using it as a gimmick. Which is really what the 3D, when you talk about 3D houses, that's what 3D houses are. They're nothing more than a gimmick. And Lunatics this year, I did the house, that was probably the house I did the least. I think I only did it 3 times over the course of my however many nights I went. The last time I did it without the 3D glasses on. I wanted to see, if that actually made a difference. And it really didn't. The house was just filled with a lot of bland spaces, the bright neon colors. The only effective element in that house for me was the tunnel with the 3D glasses on. Even without it, the tunnel is actually still pretty effective. But the overall encompassing thing of that house was just so wrong. It was done so wrong. The approach was wrong. And it really felt like they were just like, okay, well, we have an icon. The icon needs a house. Which is generally the case. There are instances like in 2011 and 2010 where the icon did not have a house. But in 2010's case, Cindy was supposed to be the icon, so Cindy actually got a house that year, the orphanage, Ashes to Ashes. She's there, but Fear didn't have a house. He had his own scare zone, of course, Fear revealed. And in 2011... Lady Luck also did not have her own house, but she was also connected. Everything was connected to Lady Luck in all the houses. And she did have her own scare zone, which we won't talk about because that scare zone was terrible. But yeah, so it felt like they were like, okay, well, let's do a house so we don't piss off the diehard fans anymore. And, the icon actually has a house. And in this case, they gave her 2 houses. But the disconnect as well between the scare zone and the house, I thought was not effective either. There are things, behind the scenes also, Chance's house was technically supposed to be, at one point anyway, in the spare Shrek building until they moved it to the back. So it made a lot more sense to have her house and her scare zone right there. But logistics and stuff like that sort of interfered with that method, so they had to move the house to the back. That didn't really bother me, but there was a disconnect there between the house and the scare zone, which I did not enjoy. Krampus I thought was a good example of a house that, yeah, cool, the sets are fine or whatever, but Krampus suffered from a lot of repetition. There was nothing really that was different in that house. Everything when you walked through that house, all you saw were the elves. And you had, 2 Krampuses, one on the roof and one, that was a bait and switch for one of the elves to come out and scare you. But everything in that house was repetitive. It was so repetitive. The scares were not hid well. Sure, the sets were cool. And the snow, when it worked, was a nice effect. They didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't use the snow all the time. But I found it so repetitive and so not up to par, especially when you look at what they did out in Hollywood. There was a lot of people were saying when it comes to actual human characters, there was one human character in that entire thing, and she wasn't even added until later in the event. She was not there the first weekend, or I think even the second weekend. She was added later, and that was the angel, the daughter or whatever, getting choked by the Christmas lights. That was added later. That wasn't even in the house when it first started. So, or on opening weekend. Out in Hollywood, they actually used people. They actually had characters from the movie, quote unquote, in that house. And I don't know why they didn't do it here in Orlando. I think that would have, upped the, made the house even better than what it actually was, instead of this repetitive elves and stuff that just kept popping out of you. And they weren't hidden well either. It was just, for me, design-wise, Krampus just did not work. There was just something, aside from the over-repetitiveness of Krampus, it just didn't work. And there was some people I was reading throughout the event when it came to the actual characters in the house. They're like, oh, well, Universal doesn't have the rights. Well, it's a Universal property. It was the only Universal property that was at the event this year. And Hollywood had characters. So that argument does not fly for me, because there was obviously a design decision that was made not to have characters in the Krampus house, from characters from the movie, or caricatures from the movie, or human beings walking around the Krampus house at all. That to me just did not work. And, it was for me, that house did not work. But that being said, the other houses I really, really enjoyed. I thought every other house had, with the exception of American Horror Story. No, American Horror Story won House of the Year, which I still can't figure out. But I was not a huge fan of American Horror Story. Trick or Treat. There is a chance for Trick or Treat. I'll get to that a little bit later. But American Horror Story, I was not a huge fan of American Horror Story. Again, it's another example of, the sets are cool, but scare me. Do what you're supposed to do and actually scare people. American Horror Story was the most inconsistent house for me the entire year. Some run-throughs were not good, and other run-throughs were actually really good. I found that if you did the house first, whether it's doing the Stay and Scream stuff and then going into the house right away, the house was actually very well done. But if you went in throughout later in the night, especially at the end of the night or in the middle of the night, the house was not up to par. So it was the most inconsistent house for me throughout the course of the event. I'm still not sure how it won House of the Year. I get that it's popular. I guess that it's a popular property or whatever. But that kind of irks me, because when American Horror Story was the Uber house this year, so it was a very long and big house. When the scares weren't on point, when the scares and everything wasn't gelling, the house was actually very boring, because all you're doing is walking around and looking at the sets and going, oh, that's pretty, oh, this is that, whatever. But there were no scares, so it was just kind of boring for me, and it was very inconsistent. But yes, but if you have not heard, American Horror Story did win House of the Year, so more power to that. I was not a huge fan. I did like the house. It was a good house, but I wouldn't call it House of the Year for me personally. All the other houses I thought were extremely well done. They put a lot of effort into the vast majority of the other houses, whether it was The Walking Dead, which surprised the hell out of me this year, was a very good house. Probably my favorite house, my favorite Walking Dead house that Horror Nights has done so far. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. But I really liked The Walking Dead this year. I thought they did a really... We were talking about Krampus earlier about how they did not hide the scares well. Walking Dead actually did a really good job of hiding the walkers and giving the walkers multiple access points to scare people as you're walking through the house. And I thought that was very, very effective, especially given that this is the fifth time that they've done it. They finally were able to make the walkers scary. After 5 tries. They did a good job of doing that, especially when it comes to hiding the scares and giving people, giving the actors multiple ways to scare you in the house. I really, really liked The Walking Dead this year. I thought they did a really good job. Whether or not it's last year or not, we'll get to that a little bit later. But it's probably my favorite Walking Dead house that they've done this year. My favorite house this year was Halloween. I am not a fan of the movie. Halloween 2 to me is bad. And full disclosure, I did receive before the event even started a picture of what the facade was going to look like. And when I saw the facade, the sort of the VHS cover, if you will, of Halloween 2, I was like, what the hell is this? But in all fairness, the parade building doesn't really have facades. Most of the time the facades are inside. So that really didn't bother me, but I was like, well, this house is probably going to be bad. I love the approach to this house and the way that they were able to hide the scares, the unique methods they used to scare you in that house. I thought was incredibly effective. I'm one of the few people who like the room where everything explodes. I thought they did it. They were able to pull that off very well. Even though Michael, the burnt Michael, reminded me a little bit of Jason Voorhees a little bit. I don't know why, but he just kind of had a Jason Voorhees look to him. I thought they did a very good job in that house, especially capturing the movie. It's not as good as the first house, as the first Halloween, but I really like what they did inside it. They were really able to pull off something quite unique and special in there, especially when it comes to the scares. They were able to effectively hide the scares and create unique scares to surprise you as well. Whether it's coming out of fences or coming out of a locker or whatever, like I thought that they really were able to pull that off. And my top two houses kind of went back and forth. It was between Ghost Town for me and also Halloween 2. I thought Ghost Town was very effective. The sets in there were incredible. The actors always brought energy. That's something that I always talk about every year is energy, especially when it comes with the actors. Energy and overall vibe inside a house. And when we get to the scare zones, I'll talk about that a little bit as well. But Ghost Town had a very unique vibe to it because we don't see Western houses at Horror Nights. It just doesn't happen. Ghost Town, the original Ghost Town, was the last time that happened, which was in 2004. So we don't have that unique setting at Horror Nights. Usually everything is kind of the same. So I liked the unique aspect of Ghost Town, and I thought that the actors in here really pulled off a good house. They had a lot of energy, they had a lot of enthusiasm, and they tried to scare you, which is always effective. It's Halloween Horror Nights, not Halloween set decorating nights. So they really tried to scare you in that house, which I loved. Texas Chainsaw I thought was pulled off really well. If you really like the movie. It was literally like walking into the film. If you were a huge fan of the actual original film, then it was probably your wet dream, probably, because you were literally walking through that film, and I thought they did a good job there as well. I'm one of the few people who liked The Exorcist. I thought they did a really good job of creating something out of nothing, which is the question, how do you make a house that basically 90% of the film takes place in one room? I like the progression in this house. I like how every time you walked into the different bedrooms, the intensity ramped up. I really liked that aspect of The Exorcist. I thought the Reagans did a very good job. Not the best house, but or not the end-all be-all of houses, I should say. The Exorcist seems to be a house that was very hit or miss for people, where some people really liked it and other people really didn't. But different strokes for different folks. It makes me feel old too, as well. Believe me, when I remember 2004 as well. So, and actually, the original Ghost Town is one of my favorite houses that Horror Nights has ever done. The one from this year, I thought. It may top that for me. I think I still need to sort of ruminate on that a little bit longer, but I like both houses. And this one I thought complemented the one in '04 very well, even though it wasn't a sequel or anything like that. It was kind of it was a reboot or requel or whatever the hell is it you want to call it, or whatever Mike called it, a reimagining or whatever. But I liked this house a lot. I like the house from this year a lot. I talked about The Walking Dead. I really like what they did with The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead if you were to tell me before this event started that The Walking Dead would make my top 5 houses this year, I would have thought that you were crazy. But it did. It made my top 5. I really, really liked The Walking Dead this year. I almost, if it wasn't for the last night, I almost put it at number 3 for me, above Texas Chainsaw. But the run-throughs that we had at Texas Chainsaw on the last 2 nights were just, I could not ignore them. Tomb of the Ancients suffered a lot from changes. They did a lot of changes to Tomb of the Ancients throughout the course of the event. The first weekend, it was actually my favorite house, and it ended up at number 6 for me when all was said and done. I was shocked by how much this house changed. It's one of the reasons why I like to go as many times as possible is because things do change, approaches change, they add things, they subtract things. Tomb of the Ancients was actually kind of startling in what they changed since the first weekend of the event. And it really brought the house down, not in a good way, but it brought the house down for me. So still a good house. I still like what they did in there. Still like the approach. I like the theme. I like the story. What they did, in terms of, the joke, Legend of the Hidden Temple, the house or whatever. I like the house, but I was not as enthralled with the house as I was when the event first started. I thought they really did the house a disservice by making all these changes and taking things away and whatever. It hurt the house a lot. But on the Friday, the last Friday of the event, I had one of the best scares of my life at Halloween Horror Nights 2026 this year, and that was the stupid guy at the end that comes out of the curtain. I knew he was there, but it was just, timing, and he got me. He got me really, really good on the Friday, the last Friday of the event. So that's it for the houses. We're going to go. If you want to read all my in-depth stuff about the houses and the scare zones, you can go to the website and read the review there. But let's talk briefly about the scare zones before we move forward here. I was not a fan of the scare zones this year. What I talked about before about how, for me, sets don't matter. I don't care, how elaborate sets are. There's been a lot of crying from the diehards for the past 5 years now about the lack of sets in the streets because of the Superstar Parade. They cannot have these elaborate sets that they once had, especially in New York, Production Central, and in Hollywood. They have to keep the streets clear. Elaborate sets don't bother me. It's not about the sets. The sets are just an ancillary to what should be going on, and that's scaring you, and that relies on the actors. It's talk about energy as well. These scare zones had no energy. There was no energy to any of these scare zones this year. A lot of it was just basically walking through and the actors stopping to take pictures with people, selfies and things like that. There was no scaring going on. If you have not heard, Dead Man's Wharf won Scare Zone of the Year this year, which to me is not good. Dead Man's Wharf had great lighting, it had a great atmosphere, it had the boat, but that Scare Zone was so hindered by the fact that it was such a funnel getting through that Scare Zone with the crowds of people walking through there, because it was so tight, because that boat came out so far. It only left a little bit of space for people to walk through that Scare Zone. Dead Man's Wharf won Scare Zone of the Year, yes. But it added a lot of problems when walking through that Scare Zone. And the actors in that Scare Zone really were kind of hit or miss. Sometimes they would try to scare you, sometimes they would try to do things, but most of the time when walking through Dead Man's Wharf, they were just stopping to take pictures with people, stopping to take selfies and things like that. Now, you could say, well, I hate selfie culture, things like that. I think that doesn't matter to me. But scare actors are there to scare you. They're there to be a part of the atmosphere, to scare you. And that was just not there for me in any of the scare zones except for one, and that was Vamp 55. I was not a huge fan of Vamp 55, but I liked what the actors did in there. They tried to do things. They tried to scare you. They tried to interact with you as their characters. They were they made that scare zone, even though the Scare Zone didn't have the most elaborate sets or the most elaborate lighting or whatever. They made the Scare Zone. And that is what they should do. And that is why I liked Van 55 a lot, because people who go to the event a lot talk a lot about people watching. You go there, you watch other people get scared, you watch the actors interact with other people. Van 55 was that Scare Zone this year, where you can go in and you can, have fun in that Scare Zone and walk around and interact with the scare actors, and they will interact back with you, and you can watch other people get scared. Like, that was, to me, that was Scare Zone of the year. Even though I did not like the Scare Zones this year, that was the one that was what a Scare Zone should be. Whether or not it was, had the most elaborate sets or whatever, because it didn't. It was just, a bunch of floats in the middle of the street or whatever, and that's it. All the Scare Zones had that vibe for me this year, where there was no energy going on. There was pretty things, lots of lights and scenery, especially you're talking about Dead Man's Wharf, or you're talking about Lair of the Banshee. The Central Park Scare Zones always have, it's the same thing. I mean, it's the dark lighting, and it's to me, it just, whatever. The actors in there didn't really, what surprised me about Lair of the Banshees is that they did not use those alcoves as much as I thought they were going to. Every once in a while, you'd see one of the scare actors that would go into the alcove and do whatever, but they didn't use those a whole lot, and that was kind of puzzling to me. I'm like, okay, well, they're there. Why aren't you using these to basically scare people? That Scare Zone also suffers from the fact that there's a lot of people walking through there, especially with the show there. That Scare Zone fills up quite a bit, and it hinders them from really going to town, and so there's a lot of logistical problems this year with the Scare Zones, whether it's whatever. Not a fan of Dead Man's Wharf winning Scare Zone of the year, but I always emphasize that it has nothing to do to me, for me, the sets. I don't care about elaborate sets. I mean, they're cool, but it's about the actors. It's about what the actors bring to it, whether it's a Scare Zone or a house. It's about the energy and the enthusiasm and the approaches they take to scare you. Becoming these characters in the Scare Zones or the houses. That is the meat and potatoes of Halloween Horror Nights. It's not about the elaborate sets. And that's something that I talk to people about now when it comes to The Exorcist. The Exorcist did not have the most elaborate sets in the world for me. But what I liked about the house was what they did in there. Like what the actors brought, what the Reagans brought. That, to me, overshadows the lack of these big, massive sets, whether you're talking about American Horror Story or Krampus. It's about the actors, and that to me is the most important thing for Halloween Horror Nights. And the Scare Zones this year were the biggest offenders of that, where the actors just really didn't bring anything to it. I like in the Legions of Horror from 2012. I actually liked the Legions of Horror in 2012 because, yeah, these sets weren't elaborate in the streets or whatever, but the actors brought stuff to it. Whether it was going inside stores or going inside restaurants or they brought an energy to the Scare Zones, and it wasn't the sets. The sets are always a complement to the actors, and they use the sets to their advantage as well. It's not just about the sets for me. So that to me was the biggest crime when it comes to the Scare Zones this year. Especially Chance's Scare Zone. That Scare Zone was a huge waste of space. They should never have done that. If you wanted to put Chance on a stage somewhere, you could have done it somewhere else, and you could have used Production Central for a better Scare Zone instead of just putting up these stages with these stupid puppets that didn't look very good. You could have actually had. Puppets, by the way, were a theme this year. There were a lot of mannequins all over the event this year, whether it was the Scare Zone, the Scare Zones, or the houses. There were a lot of puppets this year, a lot of mannequins. But anyway, so for my full thoughts on Halloween Horror Nights 26, you can go to the website and get more in detail there. But now we're going to move on to, we're going to talk about Halloween Horror Nights 27, because that'd be a miss if I didn't. I know there are a lot of people out there that are already speculating about houses coming for next year, right? Well, I think that you can nail down one, and that's American Horror Story. American Horror Story will more than likely be back next year. It was a huge hit this year with people. And I don't know anything about the American Horror Story contract. Some people have said that they hired a multi-year contract. And it kind of makes sense because they did, this year they split up, season 1, season 1, 4, and 5? Is that what it was? 1, 4, and 5. So next year you could, do the other seasons that they didn't do this year. 2, 3, and the new one. Asylum, Covenant, Roanoke, yeah. Which is seasons 2, 3, and 6. So you can do that next year. And then if it is a multi-year contract, whether or not they, goes beyond 2 years, you can then do houses based on single seasons. Another one that I think that you could probably say is going to come back is The Walking Dead. I know there's a lot of speculation out there about a permanent attraction. I would personally not put too much faith in that right now. I could be wrong, but I would be willing to bet that a permanent attraction does not come to Orlando this year. So next year, you will probably have The Walking Dead come back. I mean, that show is still immensely popular. I would not put it past the powers that be to bring it back for another year. The problem is that the house this year was so well received by a bunch of people, by the rational people. If you talk to like the diehard fanboys and stuff like that, they just like, oh well, The Walking Dead, whatever. They usually rank it very low. But based on the quality of the house, my fear is that when they bring it back, it's not going to be as good as it was this year, especially with this year being sort of an all-encompassing, a greatest hits, if you will, of the past seasons. You might not have that if they bring it back again. I fear they go backwards instead of going forwards. But at this point in time, I'm willing to believe that The Walking Dead is coming back, as well as American Horror Story. Movie properties is just too early to tell. There's not a whole lot of new things. I do not see The Conjuring coming. I think that ship has kind of sailed right now. I think you've sort of passed that window for now until they come out with a new Conjuring, Conjuring 3 or whatever, which I'm not sure is actually in production or not. I don't know if they're currently doing it or not. Excuse me. But I do not see... I think especially with the success of this current season and what has transpired this current season, don't be surprised if the house does come back next year, or a version of the house, you get a strict season 7 house. Because I think also some people were confused. Some of the more not in tune people were probably confused when they walked through the house and they did not see. Spoiler alert, I don't watch The Walking Dead, by the way. I gave up on that show back in season 3. But I read some of the comics, and I was not one of these people who were surprised about Senor Glenn's death. So spoiler alert here. But I know that some people who were not as well in tune with what the house this year was, which was just basically seasons 1 through 6, or 1 through 6. They were asking where that whole thing was, because the premiere of The Walking Dead happened, through the event. So, people were like, hey, where's Glenn's head and this and that, blah, blah, blah. So I would not be surprised if they bring it back and it is solely just season 7. But at this point in time, I am inclined to believe that it is coming back, because I do not believe that there is going to be a permanent Walking Dead attraction this year. It doesn't mean that it won't be, they won't bring a permanent Walking Dead attraction sometime in the future. Well, I know what happens on the show via people that do watch it, and I have read some of the comics, but I gave up on the show a long time ago. Season 3 or 4, I think I stopped. I just couldn't take it anymore. I don't like any of the characters on that show. I think the characters are all nincompoops, and I don't, I just don't care. And the stories aren't intriguing enough for me to stick around and watch. So American Horror Story has kind of been the same thing for me. I liked the first 2 seasons of American Horror Story, and then Coven is really where it started to go off the rails for me. And then Freak Show I thought was okay, but I thought it was just a people sitting around in a writer's room and just basically throwing every idea that they had at a board and saying, let's just put it all in there. And I watched the first 4 episodes of Hotel, and I was not a fan. So, and I don't have cable right now. I cut my cable a long time ago, so I have not been able to watch Roanoke, even though I hear good things about Roanoke. I've not been able to watch it. So, but I am interested in watching Roanoke. I do not like this idea of perhaps bringing in the Exorcist TV show, which if you've not seen the Exorcist TV show, I actually recommend giving it a watch because it is actually a very good show. And, the first 4 or 5 episodes of the show, you'll probably sit there and go, what is happening here? But there is one episode where everything sort of, you're like, aha, there's an aha moment. And it sort of brings everything together, which I really kind of enjoy. I don't like the idea of bringing the show to the event. Stick to the movie and just be done with it. Another TV show that I think you could possibly see coming, I know it was rumored last year, is Ash vs. Evil Dead. Because last year the show was kind of like, it didn't have, it was new. It was fresh. Nobody knew how the show was going to be perceived. Nobody knew how the show was going to if the show was going to last beyond the first season. But now that we know that Ash vs. Evil Dead is actually a bona fide hit, and it's going to be going for quite some time, and people like it, and it's got a lot of buzz going for it, I would not be surprised if Ash vs. Evil Dead is actually on the table for next year. As far as what's interesting is that when you look at movie properties at this juncture in Halloween Horror Nights history, going into Halloween Horror Nights 27, movie properties, especially classic movie properties, there's not a whole lot now that they can mine from to bring to the event that haven't already been here. I know that there is a new Friday the 13th film coming, but that movie's been in production for forever, it seems like. You also have the prequel to Leatherface, the Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's supposedly coming next year as well. But we just had Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we also had Freddy vs. Jason in the very near past, as well as houses for Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and even the remakes to Texas Chainsaw. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of movie properties to really mine from anymore that are within the public consciousness, that are front and center in the public consciousness. You have like the cult films, like everyone talks about, Killer Clowns from Outer Space and things like that. But I don't see a property like Killer Clowns coming really unless they can convince the public of what it actually is, But what's interesting is that there's a lot of horror television that Universal can mine from these days, whether it's Ash vs. Evil Dead or American Horror Story or The Walking Dead or The Strain or Stranger Things or whatever, even though I don't want Stranger Things to come. Please don't bring Stranger Things to Halloween Horror Nights. There are a lot of television properties they can mine from these days, which would not surprise me if we see a shift next year into a lot more TV properties as opposed to movie properties. Whether it's American Horror Story, Walking Dead, Ash vs. the Evil Dead, Stranger Things, or whatever. There's a lot more television properties you can do these days. Would not surprise me if we see a shift there, because a lot of those other major movie properties have already been mined, and there's not a whole lot of newer movie properties that you could really bring to the table, in my opinion, aside from The Conjuring or what Scream, but Scream is not coming for a while, so you can scratch that off the list right now, unless they're able to somehow work out the debacle that happened in 2015. Scream is not coming for a while, so you can mark that, because that's really, in terms of modern day horror, the new Mummy movie is coming. Yes, I was getting to that in a minute. Universal does have the new Mummy property coming. The problem that I see with the Mummy, and it's not that, I mean, we haven't seen the new Mummy movie yet, so we don't know, but Universal is trying to build this, Universal's Monsters universe, this, kind of like what Disney is doing with the Avengers. The whole Marvel thing, and DC, they want their own universe, which I've said this for years, because as a kid, one of my favorite experiences was watching, your Dracula meets the Wolfman, or your Abbott and Costello's, or whatever, Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Those things, the crossovers of all these Universal Classic Monsters. I'm actually very happy that they're finally doing it. Now they have, this shared universe idea is actually very popular. The problem with The Mummy, for me anyway, is that The Mummy is more, the Tom Cruise version is going to be more of an action-oriented film. I have not seen Dracula Untold, so I can't speak to that film. But to me, that poses a problem. However, Universal did do two houses based on the Brendan Fraser version of The Mummy. You had The Mummy, which I believe was in 99 or 98. You had the house based on The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser version of The Mummy. And you also had The Mummy Returns, which was in 2001, I believe. So it's not like you can't do it. The problem is that we just don't know. We don't know the tone of this new Mummy movie. However, you better believe that the suits are like, this is our thing. We're doing this, especially when it comes to creating this Universal Classic Monsters universe. So The Mummy is definitely on the table for next year. I would not put it past the execs to bring The Mummy here. My concern is that it is like a Dracula Untold, which is a little bit more action-oriented, or the Brendan Fraser versions of The Mummy, which were more action-oriented and not more horror-esque. But it could work, and you better believe that they're like, well, no, synergy, corporate synergy, Universal Monsters Universe, The Mummy, we got Tom Cruise, a little bit of a side tangent. What I like about what they're doing with this new cinematic universe, because it's all going to hinge on The Mummy. If The Mummy does not do well, if the public is not sold on this version of The Mummy, then this idea of the Universal Classic Monsters universe kind of goes away. But what I like what they're doing is they're bringing in talent. You have Tom Cruise in The Mummy. You have Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man. You have Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You have what's-his-face as Frankenstein. I can't remember. Is it Javier Bardem as Frankenstein? So you have all these huge names that are a part of this, which I think is actually really, really cool. But yes, it would not surprise me if The Mummy comes next year. But that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot of other things that you can mine from. If you do The Mummy, perhaps you do a throwback year where you give the Universal Classic Monsters sort of like a 2009 version, of Halloween Horror Nights, where you give the Universal Classic Monsters a revival, if you will. That could work, but we've seen those a lot already, so I don't know. I would like it because I'm a huge fan of the Universal Classic Monsters, so more power to that. But anyway, so that's it for Halloween Horror Nights 27. There's not a whole lot of, I would not, like I spoke about earlier, I would not be surprised if an icon comes next year that was a side character in the past that they're sort of plucking out of a side role and putting into front and center, like an Eddie or Cindy or whatever. Be more inclined to believe that Cindy could be more higher up on the list than Eddie, but they've had problems. That's why Cindy was scrapped twice. They've had problems with sort of making this dead child, sort of the icon of Horror Nights. So I would not be surprised if that doesn't happen, but don't be surprised if they bring back an Eddie or a caretaker or Cindy, or take some other side character that they've had in the past and make them the icon. That would not surprise me at all. But that's all I have to say about Halloween Horror Nights 27. It's still very, very early, so I'm not going to get into too much Halloween Horror Nights 27 speculation. What I do want to end on, though, is I get asked a lot, what property out there do you most want to see at Halloween Horror Nights? Especially now, because a lot of these properties have been mined. We've had a lot of these classic properties mined already. So what properties do I like? Well, truth be told, a couple of the properties that I've asked for a long time have already come to the event. One of them this year, and that is The Exorcist. I've wanted The Exorcist to come for a long time. I never knew how they were going to pull it off, but I was just like, hey, bring, please, The Exorcist, because that is my favorite horror film of all time. So I've wanted that to come for a long time. I've also wanted Freddy vs. Jason to come, which has already come. So that's crossed off the bucket list. I've already seen Friday the 13th. I've seen Halloween. Halloween was another one. So Halloween has already come. It's come twice. That's something else that people have been speculating about Halloween Horror Nights 27. Do they bring Halloween back, and do they do like Halloween 3, which please God don't do that, or another version of Halloween? What I wouldn't mind in the future is, instead of trying to mine these properties, instead of trying to mine, trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find these popular characters or movies that haven't been at the event, why not get the creators? Get some of these creators who, obviously Wes Craven has passed, but some of these people who are responsible for these movies, whether it's Friday the 13th or whether it's Nightmare on Elm Street. Fortunately, Wes Craven has passed. Or John Carpenter, or Sam Raimi, or Joe Dante. Some of these really these iconic horror directors, and have them do their own house, have them make their own house instead of collaborate with them in creating a house rather than bringing a property that they've done to the event. Do that instead. I know Hollywood has sort of dabbled with that a bit, whether it's Eli Roth or Rob Zombie or whatever, or Alice Cooper. They've sort of had them create their own houses. I wouldn't mind seeing that come to Orlando, as opposed to trying to, like I said, scrape the bottle of the barrel for some of these horror properties. Have them come in and collaborate with them to create a new house. That I wouldn't mind seeing. Then that segues into another, Stephen King. Now, Stephen King has long said that he doesn't like to do this. He doesn't like to. His properties are off limits. The closest that we've had to a Stephen King property, really, there were two. Dead Man's Wharf this year was so a ripoff of The Fog, and last year's run, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, was very much a take on The Running Man. You could argue that it was, The Hunger Games or whatever, but The Hunger Games is obviously a takeoff of The Running Man as well. There are elements in there. There are elements that complement both of those properties. I would love Stephen King. Sadly, it's never going to happen. So I've sort of given up on that. The last property is The X-Files. The X-Files is something that I've wanted probably more so than The Exorcist. And in the state of Halloween Horror Nights today, where more TV properties are getting used as houses, this is a ripe time to bring The X-Files to the event. That is probably the one that I've wanted the most, is to have an X-Files house. But most of the things that I've wanted to come to the event have already happened. So, like I said, Exorcist this year. I had Freddy vs. Jason. Alien is another one that I've sort of tossed around with, but we've had sort of an Alien house with Alien vs. Predator. I wouldn't mind a Soul Alien house. But with that being said, we've also had Interstellar Terror, which is sort of an Alien knockoff. So, that's already kind of been at the event. So, that's whatever. It didn't have the Alien logo or name slapped on it, but it was more or less the Alien franchise, basically the first Alien movie. So, it is what it is. But hands down, the property that I have most wanted to come to the event is The X-Files. And I know they did dabble with I can't remember the name of the house, but in 2000 there was a house that was sort of X-Files-like in its tone and in its story. They dabbled in it back then, but no, I want an X-Files house. I want a Mulder and Scully in a house. Damn it, I want an X-Files house. That is probably what I've been most. Total Chaos, thank you so much. But yes, I want an X-Files branded house, please. That is what I've most wanted my entire Horror Nights career, is an X-Files house. But like I said, most of the stuff that I've wanted to come has already happened. So there's not a whole lot of TV programs. I'm trying to think of things today. Scream is another property that I've wanted to come, but I think that ship has sailed. I don't think you're going to see Scream come to the event for quite some time, especially now. I mean, it could happen. They could work out their problems, but I based on what I know, I highly doubt that's going to happen. At least in the near future, that's not going to happen. I know people have tossed around Hellraiser. I'm not a big Hellraiser person, so no. But like I said before, if you're instead of doing these properties, get the creators of these properties, or a horror minded person. Whether it's you can get Clive Barker to do a fucking house. Get Clive Barker to create a house. Forget a Hellraiser. Get him to work with Universal and create an original house. That would be a complete mindfuck of a thing. More so than Hellraiser. Have that happen instead of bringing the property to the event. Get the creator, one of these creators, to come in and design and create a house. Because, like I said, Hollywood has done it to an extent, whether it's Alice Cooper or Rob Zombie or whatever. They've or Eli Roth. They've had them come in and have their own content created. I'd rather see that than to really sort of scrape that bottom. Of horror properties to come to the event. So we now know, hey, you know what? Max Landis is doing a remake of his dad's American Werewolf in London film. I don't know when it's coming out, but who knows? Maybe we could have that version come to the event in the near future. I don't know. Because American Werewolf in London was also another property that I wanted to come to the event for a long time, but that's already happened. It happened twice. So the second time was not so good, but the first time, is probably still my favorite Halloween Horror Nights house ever. But yeah. So that's it. I've gotten through this. I'm gonna go take some cold pills, lots of cold pills, and lie on the couch, and whatever. But that's it, guys. So before I go, I have 2 people in the chat here. Now there's only 1 person. Are there any questions? Any questions that people have before I leave? No questions. Questions. Anybody? I'm trying to hurry up too because Facebook tends to shut me off. But yeah. So no. I do know. I'm not sure if I could really answer that question. That's a slippery slope. But I can say that Survive or Die was not meant to be Survive or Die. I'll put it in those terms. It was not meant to be Survive or Die. It was meant to be something else. Wholeheartedly meant to be something else. But circumstances and events might have changed their mind. I would not doubt if part of the reason why they decided not to do this other property in that scare zone, because it was supposed to be a property. I'll put it that way as well. It was supposed to be an IP. Could be maybe they're holding off until a later time. That would not surprise me. But Survive or Die was not supposed to be Survive or Die. So I'll leave it at that. Interpret that how you will. But no, it was not supposed to be Survive or Die in its form. Was not supposed to be Survive or Die. It was supposed to be something else. At least according to my info. It was not supposed to be what we got. And Survive or Die was okay. I didn't really talk about Survive or Die that much in the Scare Zone stuff. It was all right, for what they did. For what they put together. The problem with Survive or Die is that there's actually a very cool storyline to Survive or Die that was not really conveyed well in the Scare Zone, and I think a lot of people just got confused, including the actors. Who at one point just seemed to not care anymore, just not really do their job based on what the story was in Survive or Die. They just kind of went off and did their own thing. But yeah. So if that is the only question, I think I'm going to go ahead and go because I need to take some pills. But anyway, guys, for Mr. Josh Claus, who's stayed with me this entire time, thank you so much for watching. And you can always watch this, and we'll put it up on YouTube. We'll be up on YouTube in the near future, so you can watch it later if you want to. But yeah, so the other thing, before I go, I do want to mention that for whatever reason, no, you know what? I'm not gonna say it. I don't want to cause any drama. But yeah, so that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and we chug along to Halloween Horror Nights 27. This will probably be the last Chatcast I do for a while because there's not a whole lot of info flowing out right now. There's not a whole lot of things being said, so there's not a whole lot to talk about. So, but I did want to get on and do a little bit here. But anyway, guys, that's it for now. I'll see you guys later.